Let me tell you a story. Every year, my family attends South Carolina State University's homecoming. And I was on the phone with my family that Friday as they were reading the directives from the university. And they said no one with a handgun or any weapon will be allowed on the campus. We have detectors, and we will detect, and you'll be held accountable if you bring a firearm. Because all my brothers they pack, legally, by the way. But anyhow, South Carolina State had its homecoming, and my family were staying at the Andrew Eugenie Suites on the campus. And so my sister called me about 9:20 p.m. that Saturday night. She said, "Oh my God, there are gunshots. People are shooting. People are screaming. They're screaming." I said, "What's going on? What's going on?" And they looked outside. A few minutes later, ambulances, EMS came. But before that had happened, my nieces who were also there were coming back to where the suites were. And they said, all these kids just packed. And there was just clods of marijuana. And they were out there parking. And all of a sudden, I guess, when the football game, when it was over, they opened the floodgates. But listen, a young girl died. You could see them giving her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. You could see someone that came in, they had a helicopter them to Columbia. But listen, my nieces were at that party briefly, but their uncle Kent, who's a state senator, demanded that they come back. And someone died. And my sister, they were traumatized by it. They have never been so close. They could hear the bullets. They were jumped on the floor, on the deck of the floor, to realize just how deadly a situation like that, and someone actually dies. And so I asked myself, how in the world, no matter what protocols law enforcement may have in place, Derrick Parks, what could law enforcement have done? Absolutely nothing to prevent that situation. And for me, having my family there on the premises, being so vulnerable in that situation, just makes you understand just how deadly our society has become.
Absolutely. I don't think, in hindsight, I don't think anything you could have done. I mean, you could have as many police officers as you want out there, but when a would-be criminal wants to commit an act and they're determined to do it, you'll be hard-pressed to be able to find significant ways to stop that actor unless he's broadcast exactly what he wants to do.
You know, Marcus, what was fascinating, my brothers, they always do food and they set up tailgating, and everybody usually come to that spot. And just before the game ended, they say all these young people coming on campus, and they started smelling that marijuana. And my brother, who's older, said, "You know what? We need to pack up. We need to get out of here." Anytime you see young people gathering like this and smoking marijuana, it's nothing but a dangerous situation that could unfold eventually. We need to get out of here before dark. What is it about these kids and marijuana and getting high? And listen, the kid was having a beef with someone that made him angry. He goes back to his car, he's driving it off, and he just shoots through his window, just randomly, innocent girl who had nothing to do with the beef, shot in the head, dead in a moment. And so, what is it about marijuana? And the kid was 18 years old. What is it about a situation where you have these kids and smoking marijuana? What it induces them to?
Well, thanks for having me on, Armstrong. I'm sorry to hear that about that young girl at South Carolina State. I really am. But when you have these large crowds, Armstrong, and you're dealing with, these amount of people, anything can really happen. People are close, people are agitated, people get agitated very quickly. And so when you also have marijuana, you also have the sale of marijuana. And when things don't go in the way of some participant in that transaction will want to go, then things are heightened to happen. And lastly, just people just aren't in their right minds when they've been drinking, when they've been smoking marijuana or on some kind of narcotic. So it's unfortunate. However, that situation is very ripe for something to happen, and especially when you have those large crowds. That's what we call a target rich environment, Armstrong.
You know, my brother said something interesting. He said, I'm serving no alcohol because I don't want to get people inside. Should the campuses just ban alcohol? Can they ban marijuana smoking?
It's tough too, Armstrong.
Why is it tough?
It's because when you have, marijuana is not a metal, it's not a bottle, so you can easily sneak it in. You go to a lot of these concerts, like the NBA YoungBoy concert that they just had at Capital One Arena. They said that people's eyes were burning because of all of the smoke. So people, they bring this stuff into these events. However, you do have dry campuses on a lot of these college campuses in these states where you can't drink on certain days. But unfortunately, that's what it may have to lead to.
You know, Attorney Mcgill, you're the deputy solicitor there in South Carolina. What happens to, now that this 18-year-old, he admitted to killing this young woman, what happens to them? And also, during the entire scene on campus that weekend, they were arresting young people left and right. Where do they go? Are they just put right back out on the street?
So Armstrong, thank you for having me. Essentially, with him being charged in this crime, he's going to go through the criminal justice system. He's going to have a right to an attorney, a right to present his day, have his day in court. His attorney will either come up with defenses or either try to mitigate the amount of time that he spends in prison. It's unfortunate that we see so many young people get arrested. It's tragic that this young lady lost her life. But again, we have become so lax about, you mentioned marijuana use, and we used to consider marijuana a gateway drug, to other drugs. I submit to you that it's a gateway to other crime as well, because you're right. As soon as you smell that marijuana or you notice that people are using it, it usually makes crime occur. You mix that with alcohol, you have an out of control environment, especially when you're dealing with a homecoming situation. So it's very unfortunate that this is where we find ourselves in these times.
Leonard Snipes, I mean, you are a crime expert. There's nothing new under the sun. Is there anything that these institutions, because we like to talk about crime from the big city level, but these little places like South Carolina and Orangeburg, all across the country, they're facing the same kind of crime in these rural situations, and people are dying and losing their lives. What do? You don't go? I said, look, I was point blank. When I was invited, I said, I'm not going to homecoming. I don't want to be around big crowds. I don't want to deal with that, because I think it's one of the most dangerous places on the planet. And I hate to say that, because people have a right to go to homecoming, to have a reunion, see friends they've not had before, celebrate the institution, give money back to the institution. But man, that's becoming a very dangerous and deadly situation.
Armstrong, there's not a whole heck of a lot the criminal justice system can do about this. This is a time where people need to understand, when they see somebody dangerous, when they see circumstances getting out of control, they need to contact other people. Other people need to confront, and other people need to calm these individuals down, and to make sure that they don't do anything stupid. I mean, there's a certain point where we need to police ourselves, where the criminal justice system, as your other guests have said, I mean, look, it's easy to smuggle marijuana into any place. We have now between 300 to 400 million firearms in private hands in the United States. We have issues with mental health, all of that. And you go back decades now, the data says that the great majority of arrests involve somebody under the influence of drugs or alcohol. So when you have that mixture, we need to police ourselves. We need to get in there and tell people, hey, look, you're getting out of hand. You need to leave. This is unjustifiable. You need to grow the blank up, and you need to calm down. And there needs to be lots of people doing that, surrounding that person who's creating problems. And that's scary as the dickens, but we don't have cops on every corner. We don't have the National Guard on every corner. We don't have federal agents on every corner. There's a certain point where we need to learn to police ourselves and not be so reliant upon the criminal justice system.
So let me come back to you on this issue. Do we need to revisit marijuana laws in this country because everybody talked about the huge benefits of marijuana laws and what it will become, but that's not happening, especially for young people who are not mature enough to navigate this, and they use it as an escape. They're not getting the best education. They're failing in schools. They lack the real self-worth and self-esteem, and they try to find meaning to their life. And for this young man who took responsibility for the killing this, and this child looked like she was no more than 17 years old, that's power to him. But power at what cost?
Right. Good point. Well, reality of the situation is whether marijuana is legal or illegal, you're still going to have the use of marijuana because it wasn't the fact that it became legal that now all of a sudden everybody wants to smoke it. It just became a little more prevalent because it is legal in certain areas of the country. I think one of the things as we move inside of things that individuals have to think of moving from a point of escape, because we're not just dealing with marijuana, we're dealing with mental issues, we're dealing with people at this time, the country as a whole is dealing with a lot of turmoil. And so as we go as regular citizens to different places, whether it's games, whether it's restaurants, whether it's concerts, we need to be thinking about egress. How do we get out of here, right? In the event of an emergency, a catastrophic situation, which happened down in South Carolina, what's our plan of escape, right? And I think we have to look at this more broadly on a broader scale of even when you go to a restaurant, the active shooter, this situation or that situation. As we continue to move forward in America, we see that we have these acts of violence and we have to protect ourselves and our family. So one of the things that I think that we always have to look at is when we do attend events that more than likely there's going to be drinking, there's going to be smoking, there may be certain levels of civil disobedience, that we have to think about how do we get ourselves to safety in an unlikely event that something may or may not happen. And I think that's where we kind of have to move to as it relates to America right now. It's even though we would like to see marijuana use go down or drinking to go down, but there's so many myriads of things that are challenging individuals right now, from mental status to they don't particularly like what's going on in war or civil disobedience, that the regular citizen really has to move offensively to be able to make sure that they're safe and their families are safe.
You know, when we come back, we had an opportunity to sit down with the director of the FBI, and he talked about Operation Summer Heat. And then later on in the show, we also had a chance to sit down with the mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser, and she talked about this issue of crime. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back. Adine. As we continue this conversation on crime and public safety and these young people out of control, we recently sat down with the director of the FBI, Kash Patel, who talked about Operation Summer Heat, an effort aimed at tackling rising violence through stronger federal and local partnerships. Let's take a look at what the FBI director had to say.
Operation Summer Heat was a 3-month surge by the FBI with our state and local partners. We started at the end of June, and we just wrapped up at the end of September. And what we did was follow one theme: crushing violent crime, one of this administration's key priorities. And we went into every single field office. We have 55 field offices scattered across the country. And today, we're going to unveil the results of Operation Summer Heat and what law enforcement can do when you let good cops be cops.
What is it that you find that all these cities have in common that is lacking, where it takes an operation like Summer Heat to go in and disrupt this crime, make sure the partners have the resources that they need, and make sure that these criminals understand that their days of destroying and controlling communities and placing people in fear are over?
Well, I think a quick historical analysis is important here. You have to recognize that there was an explosion in violent crime, and it didn't happen in a month or 6 months. It happened over the course of years due to the prior administration's lackadaisical approach against crime, and violent criminals took advantage of that. So the FBI, under my leadership, we came in and said, okay, violent crime's exploding. Everybody knows that. We see that. You can't walk around these cities anymore. People are getting shot. Kids are getting shot. Drugs are killing our youth. We need to do what the FBI is best at and crush violent crime. So we targeted all the major cities in the country. We called our state and local authorities and we said, we need you all in as task force officers. You have the ground level intelligence. We have to attack the criminal enterprises where they start and their entire spider web of networks across the country. And that's the beauty of summer heat. We went.
Attorney Mcgill, how do you respond to FBI Director Patel and what they're trying to do across the country? And does that also trickle down into a state like South Carolina that also is facing a wave of crime?
I mean, I think it's absolutely necessary, Armstrong. I think one of the most important things in, joining a task force like that or having that implemented is being proactive instead of reactive. I think that's been a national issue, even in small rural areas where I live in South Carolina. We react to violent crime a lot of times, but it's still there. Offenders are still committing crimes. And if we send a message that we are not going to tolerate violent crime, that we're going to prosecute them, that we're going to keep our community safe, then I think that minimizes the number of people that offend or potentially reoffend. I mean, this is not a partisan issue. Everybody that you talk to, regardless of their political affiliations, socioeconomic status, race, gender, everyone wants to feel safe in their homes and in their communities.
Leonard?
Look, first of all, according to the U.S. Department of Justice, recent data just released, back in 2022, we had a 44% increase in rates of violent crime. The rate of violent crime in the United States has not changed for 2023, and the last report that just came out was for 2024. It remains basically the same. So with that 44% increase continues over the last 3 years. We're entering a new era of violence in the United States, and that's per the U.S. Department of Justice. The FBI has recorded reductions in violent crime of 3 to 4%. But you have to take a look at cities where it was a 50% increase in homicide and a 36% increase in aggravated assaults. So if there's crime reductions in cities, as many claim, it's probably a regression to the mean or crime beginning to lower itself. But you're going to hear this from me over and over and over again. Yes, I want the FBI, I want local law enforcement, I want local prosecutors to go after people who are dangerous to the community. I want those people to be held accountable. But again, this remains a societal issue. Throughout all of my conversations, it's the idea that law enforcement can solve this. I don't think law enforcement can solve anything. I think basically we as citizens, whether we're talking about spouse abuse or intimate partner violence, or we're talking about drug use, or we're talking about a wide array of things, we need to control ourselves. The population of the United States, the population of cities need to step up and tell the bad guys, stop the crap. And yes, I understand that's scary. I understand that's taking huge risks, but we as a society have got to come together to protect each other. We're having, you're talking about your family situation. And I have great respect for that. But that's happening, thousands upon thousands of times every day in cities and in local areas throughout the United States. Can law enforcement and the criminal justice system stop it? Probably not. Can we as a society stop it? Probably yes. And we've known that for decades through my criminological studies. It is society that controls crime, not the criminal justice system.
Derrick, do federal crackdowns like Operation Summer Heat, which is about to become Operation Winter Heat, create lasting change or short-term headlines? Or do you think Leonard has an excellent point? The only way that we can change crime is not through law enforcement, that we become the law enforcement to prevent it before it ever happens. And listen, I don't know, you and I as adults can navigate and understand that message. But I don't know if young people who are hardened, they've not been raised, they have no idea what moral striving is. They have no idea what self-respect is. They have no idea what it means to be a man. They have no idea what discipline and hard work is. They listen to this social media. They listen to these different platforms that are this dark web, and it's as if they're creating evildoers. They're like demons. Their behavior is demonic.
Sure. Well, I think to underscore the last guest, what he was saying is, I think I definitely believe that the federal crackdown or the summer heat program has yielded great results. It's about the sustainability. And so to underscore what the last guest was saying, the sustainability will have to come from the community, because now we have to be able to make sure that individuals have what we call fear-based respect, but not just parents and the rule of law, but understanding that they can be productive members of society. But you know, to really get down deep into what's going on, I think that if we can sustain this kind of crackdown, and that's where the whole thing is how do we sustain this situation? And so it just can't be from a law enforcement perspective. The law enforcement perspective gives us a head start on kind of bringing things even, but then it has to be community that has to come in to be able to backfill that situation to make things much more sustainable and long-term, where law enforcement is now not as prevalent, not as rich, if you will, and trying to resolve these kind of issues.
Why have these criminals, Marcus, become so emboldened in their actions?
Armstrong, that's a very good question, and honestly, it starts with the relationships. Number one, I think attorney.
What relationship?
The relationships that, number one, law enforcement has with the community. That's where it starts at. And,
not the family?
Of course, with the family, of course. However, when these criminals are getting in trouble, the lack of punishment that they're having is no real punishment given. They feel like it's a slap on the wrist, and I can go out and do the exact same thing with no punishment at all. So that right there, I feel like it really just, the recidivism is at least 70%, and that really just drives recidivism out the roof.
Attorney Mcgill, what's driving repeat offenses in the sense of a revolving door in the justice system?
Well, Armstrong, as a former prosecutor, I'll tell you my experience has been this. Sometimes people do not get punished severely enough, as you mentioned. Folks get out on bond, they recommit crimes, they are right back out in the streets. They do not fear the criminal justice system. They do not fear our community, to go to what the other guests say. In terms of prosecuting cases, you have to have your witnesses and your victims show up to court. Those folks come directly from the community. And so when we lived in a kind of environment where if we knew something, we say something, and we shifted away from that, these criminals have taken absolute control of that, and they understand that. They understand that if they reoffend, there's a chance their cases could run concurrently. They can get a global deal on everything. So they are not fearful of the consequences. Again, a lot of times we see these crackdowns on crimes that are small in nature in terms of the time frame that they span. We see tough on crime when there's an election coming, but what happens in the middle? And that's what these criminals and these repeat offenders take advantage of.
How sophisticated are these criminals, and what have you found as a prosecutor, as a deputy solicitor, that is really effective, Attorney Mcgill?
Armstrong, I think, and I'm a defense attorney now, but as an attorney in general, I think every case has to be evaluated on a case-by-case scenario. But what I believe is that we have to look at somebody's criminal record. And I tell people all the time, whenever I go make a big purchase, the bank is going to look at my credit score. They're looking at my history. I need to look at your criminal record to figure out what kind of person you are. You cannot ask for grace every time you come into court if you have a magazine for a criminal record and have never been punished. What message does that send? It sends a message that our prosecution is weak, our law enforcement is weak because they can't get a prosecutor to go, full force on these crimes. It sends a message in our communities to our victims and witnesses that nobody's going to stand up for them, and it makes them not want to show up for court. So all of these things play an important role in dealing with crime. If we take one piece out of the pie, it fails. It's not a complete pie.
Marcus?
I mean, I echo those same sentiments. Just like the attorney said, when you don't have any kind of accountability and no one's afraid of the system, no one's afraid to go ahead and do it again. And also, just on the law enforcement piece, I've spoken directly with police officers that says, unfortunately, if it's nothing egregious, so to speak, they're not really going to go after it just because they know it's not going to get paper or prosecuted properly, Armstrong, and it's unfortunate.
And we'll be back. We'll hear from the mayor of the nation's capital. She set the example for the rest of the country, how you work with the President of the United States, balancing the National Guard, balancing the FBI, DEA, ICE, and Homeland Security, how to bring crime under control, get rid of the graffiti, remove homelessness, and place it where it belongs, and return the city back to less crime and cleanliness, which is what D.C. is today. I mean, D.C. 6 months ago is not the same place. It's like something in an alt universe, and I'll be the first to tell you, I am so thrilled when I return to D.C. because it is truly the example for the rest of the world of what a capital city can become if all the collective partners are working together for one accord to reduce crime and send these thugs where they belong, behind bars, with the hopes of them never seeing the light of day. We'll be back.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence, there's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com.
We spent 2 years driving down crime in our city in every category. So violent crime was down 35%, then down 25%, 26% this year. It's down even more now, post-surge. And there's no mayor in any place in the world that's going to tell you any level of violent crime is a good thing. So if we can drive down carjackings, if we can drive down homicide or use of weapons, we're going to use every resource available. What's more important to us, and we think it works, and I think the experience of the last 2 years really suggests to me that it works, is we expanded what we call pretrial detention and the number of crimes that a judge can hold people pretrial. Now, this is America, so we have a belief that a person is innocent until they're proven guilty. But I believe if you are a violent offender and you are charged with a violent crime, that the judge should look carefully at keeping you detained until your trial. And we have noticed in the last 2 years, since we expanded our law around pretrial detention, that more judges are holding more people who have committed a crime and are charged with another violent crime. And as a result, I believe out of all of the things that we've done to change the law, that expanding pretrial detention is focused on the right people. And the right people are being held, and we see gun crimes, homicides, carjackings all go down double digits. And I think that's the kind of smart on crime change that we needed.
That's how Mayor Bowser of Washington, D.C., very proud of her leadership and her courage. Marcus, what are the people in the community saying about what the mayor just spoke about and her collaboration with the President of the United States?
That's a great question, Armstrong. I've spoke with several, and like you and the mayor and Cash Patel, I'm a resident of Washington, D.C. I spoke with several of my neighbors, and I would say a good 90 to 95% of my neighbors are happy with what the president and the mayor are doing in Washington, D.C. They're safer. My wife, she gets to go on her runs at late night when she feels more comfortable going on her runs later in the evening. People out walking their dogs, people out with their kids now. I feel a whole lot better about taking my family out. And again, those are the same sentiments as some of my neighbors. I have heard otherwise, people, they don't like the aesthetics of the National Guard, but I also asked them, and they protest some of the agents coming to DC, but I also asked them, what about the retail stores like the CVS's, the pharmacies that close due to all of the theft, where a lot of our elderly can't get their medication and things like that. Like where was that same type of protest when that stuff was going on? But here it is. I take it back to the positive. Most of the people they really are pleased with what's going on with the mayor and the president.
And Derrick, one of the things that the mayor alluded to and what they're doing to fight crime is the president signed an executive order for the death penalty. Talk about the kind of message when young people knowing that they're committing these crimes, especially murder, that they could possibly get the death penalty. I don't think people understand how much that weighed, and that was a game changer here in our nation's capital.
That's absolutely a game changer. I think, first and foremost, that the mayor of the city is 100% looking for the best interests of all her residents and citizens. So I think she's doing a phenomenal job. However, with the death penalty being on the table, I think this is going to really change the attitudes as it relates to will-be criminals. I mean, you could be put to death for some of the crimes that you are doing. And so that will have a dramatic effect on individuals and make them think twice about pulling that trigger or doing what we call, I won't say crimes of passion, but crimes of not thinking about them, not premeditated crimes, if you will. And so I think that is going to, because what's going to happen is individuals within that community will start to have discussions with some of the younger individuals that may commit crimes to say, you don't want to go down that road, because that road is not going to be pleasant for anybody at all, because you can be put to death from the crimes that you're committing. So I think, coupled with the federal surge and with the new death penalty on the table, I think we're going to start to see a dramatic tune-up of attitudes as it relates to would-be criminals and how they want to kind of maybe move to a different territory to try to commit some of these crimes. But the death penalty, I think, is a strong game changer as it relates to criminal activity.
Dominick Izzo, my man, spent 16 years as a law enforcement, and he's out of Chicago. Recently, every time you look at it, Chicago had 5 murders over the weekend, 25 people shot, 15 murders over the weekend, 30 people shot. And yet it seems as though the leadership in that state and in this city want to protect the criminals, want to protect people who disrupt and destroy communities. And why would they not want to embrace anything that could reduce the crime and make people feel safe at home? Dominick, what is happening in Chicago and these other places like Portland?
Lack of accountability or sense of. Well, you guys are talking about the death penalty and acting as if putting that in place is going to make a difference. How can anyone who grows up in a day where it doesn't matter if it's school, When I was in school back in the 80s, we had a threat of detention and expulsion. Students are not expelled anymore. You go to work and you piss your boss off as a teen, you get your first job, your parent shows up to yell at the boss, you don't get fired or suspended. No juvenile today grows up with consequences going through school with their parents. Parents can't discipline kids. DCFS will show up, remove them from the home. You guys think putting death penalty on the table is going to make a difference? These kids have zero concept of cause and effect. It's gonna make zero difference whatsoever. And when it comes down to your local government, it's recidivism is the name of the game because it's a moneymaker. It's as simple as that. The no bail, cash bond, and all that kind of stuff, it's nothing new. It's simply been a game that the SA, state's attorneys or district attorneys love to play, where let's only take people to trial that we know we can win because we want to have a good record to show the state of people who elected me that, I'm a winning prosecutor. It's all a game. It's all about money, and it's all about lack of consequences for actions.
Attorney Mcgill, as a former prosecutor, how do you respond to Dominick?
Well, I do think that there are issues in the way that our youth have been growing up and how they've been reared. But again, we can't rear children. That's not the government's function. But what we can do for parents that don't want to raise their children, we can punish them. I think that we have to have a community effort, like I mentioned earlier, where the community is involved in making sure that our communities are safe, in that they have a relationship with law enforcement so that they feel comfortable to come forward with crime. I also feel like there is a dire need for our prosecutors, as he mentioned, to not only go after cases that are big wins for them, that's going to get media attention, but to give every victim and every witness their day in court. All of those things play a component. But again, if we look at the rate of truancy for juvenile offenders and then their likelihood to re-offend and become adult offenders, the risk is always greater. So there needs to be greater punishment for children that don't go to school. So hopefully we can keep them in school and make sure that they're getting their education to stop them from committing crimes. And if they want to commit crimes as adults, the punishment needs to be swift and it needs to be harsh when they commit violent crimes.
Dominick, I want to come.
That can't happen. That can't happen because as an former police officer, when parents tried to discipline their kids, I grew up with the 70s with a heavy hand from my mother. My father never laid hand on us, but mom beat us, right? And you learned classical conditioning. You grew up, when I was a cop, it was every kid thought all they had to do was call 911 because now meddling teachers want to get involved. Oh, your mom slapped you at home for not doing your homework? Parents are doing the best they can. Classical conditioning and physical discipline is a necessity because you cannot reason with a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old whose brain is not developed. We call it beating the kids now. Cops show up because kid missed school, dad or mom gave the kid a spanking, and now the state demands we arrest the parents. You see this every single day. The state is trying to raise your kids. You look at DCFS or Child Protective Services, they're incentivized. They're paid from the state, I believe, a certain amount of dollars to have kids in the system. So it's talking out of both sides of your mouth there where you're saying, we're not here to raise your kids. Well, if that's the case, then have cops show up and say, you discipline your child? Well, I don't see any marks. I don't observe anything. Continue as necessary until your kid learns.
Attorney Mcgill, your reply?
The government cannot raise people's children, is what I said. But again, I don't think that there is a one-shot solution to fix all of this. Again, I don't know about Child Protective Services and being incentivized for taking kids. I think that their role is to keep families together. I don't know about them receiving any kind of monies, but again, there has to be accountability for the community. There has to be accountability for the parenting. And I agree, people have become lax in all of these things, and it has had a direct correlation on the success and likelihood of our youth to not offend. But again, I don't know what the solution is regarding this, but what I will say, Armstrong, is it's going to take a collective approach to fix it.
Derrick?
Well, one of the things that I think is the biggest challenge is again, the former guest, the guest has a point where if there is no consequence to the action, then individuals will not fear whatever the action is that they're doing. And so I think what we have to look at, I disagree with him about the death penalty being on the table because, again, hardened criminals are going to do what they're going to do, right? So it doesn't matter whether death penalty is on the table or not. But the individuals that's caught in the middle, and this is kind of see where the DC thing is kind of going, where there's good kids just in a bad crowd, right? And some of the bad crowd are influencing the good kids. But the good kids that know that, wait a minute, we can be put to death from this. So we can now extract those individuals and really focus on those individuals that's kind of leading the pack as relates to doing crime and mischievous things.
And what a wonderful conversation. It's just so much you can learn from here, so many different perspectives, but all adds up to what we need to do to at least reduce crime dramatically, because we're not going to ever stop it totally. We'll be back.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
Dominick, give us perspective on what's happening in Chicago and the possibility of the National Guard, and what difference will that make? Or what is it that is needed to stem the crime that seems like somebody's dying every day?
I think a couple different things. It's a very dynamic problem. You have, number one, whenever somebody thinks of the police, and I was a suburban cop, I was caught in the area between Chicago and Milwaukee, and as are 80% of the police in America. When people think of the police, they think of the Chicago, New York, LA, the big cities. And for the most time, no disrespect to them, but it is what it is. They're more of like glorified security guards. You have a very low solve rate of such crimes such as homicides, carjackings. You get cops who show up, put Band-Aids on scenes, and they move on to the next call that's been waiting for 30 minutes. It's just a massive problem that will never end. You do have problems. We used to call it felony denial, where when you get a gun charge, drug charge, and you take it to your state's attorney and you have to review it as a police officer because you just can't arbitrarily charge. We could do misdemeanors, give somebody a court date, give them bail, send them on their way. But felonies, we had to have them review. The amount of times that felonies were denied by the state's attorneys it became a joke. And it's been happening for decades. So you have recidivism, right? You get bad guy off the street. They're back out on that day without any bond whatsoever. Politicians clearly use these crises as, their talking points to fuel emotions. I'm not a fan of what's going on right now because the public doesn't perceive it the way that they should. This whole immigration issue has been happening for decades. When I was on, we were deporting people left and right when we came in contact with them at a very, a violent domestic violence call, shooting, stabbing, whatever. We came in contact with somebody who was illegal. We would charge them on the state charge and put an INS hold on them. And we deported hundreds of people per month. This is nothing new. But the citizens now, considering the fact how publicized this is at a political front, that's why they're so outraged. To get it where it needs to go, I don't know. Because not you, but the government waited for this to be a pressure cooker. They're not dealing with crimes that are happening on a daily basis, like the carjackings, the shootings, the thefts, the mob actions, and they're focusing on this. So although it's needed, it needs to be done the right way. The local government, Chicago and Cook County, should have taken care of this. I'm not a fan of the president having to come in and take care of this, but he did, and I think it's just going to continue to get disastrous because people's emotions based on their ignorance are the problem.
What has not been discussed here is so much crime goes underreported. We assume that the statistics that we're given in the data reflects the reality of crime, but it doesn't. Derrick?
No, as a former assistant chief of police, there's different ways we can kind of, I don't want to say fudge the numbers, but...
It's fudging the numbers.
Fudging the numbers, right? You can call it what it is, right? And I think, you know, it is what it is. And it's not any particular city that does it more than any other city. It's just what the environment is, right? And I think, you know, no chief of police, no mayor, no governor wants to be able to sit in front of their citizens and be able to say, hey, this is the volume of crime and what's the solution to the crime, right? Because again, police only can do so much, right? And one of the things that we have to look at as we kind of started in this segment was the holistic approach, right? Police are going to be able to do certain things, but then a lot of things becomes community and home.
So do you agree that police are glorified security guards?
I definitely don't believe that police are glorified security guards. I think every police officer that puts that badge on and goes out every morning, that they're out there to do a particular job and that they are doing the job, at least in my hope, is in their best ability. The challenge becomes that a lot of times in felony cases, some mistakes may have been made as it relates to whether the arrest was made properly, the paperwork is documented properly, and as it gets to the prosecutor's office, it becomes, is it a winnable case, right? Is it fruit of the poisonous tree where we have to throw this particular evidence out because we can't use this in court? So sometimes there may be mistakes that are made, procedural mistakes, where the prosecution may not think they can win a case. So obviously, if that criminal is back out on the street, then it does give them a certain level of invincibility that they will start thinking about.
So let me go to Attorney Mcgill. What about the accountability of the courts and judges that use their judgment to put these criminals back on the street? And not only do they escalate their crime, they commit homicide. Should these court judges be held accountable? And how do you improve the role of the court and the prosecutors in that system, Attorney Mcgill?
Armstrong, I think judges have a tough job. I think it's difficult to stand and make a decision about a person that's in front of you based on limited information.
Well, if you go back to what you said, if they got a track record, yes, you said earlier, you can make a determination.
And so that's what I'm saying. So prosecutors need to be very transparent about that person's record. They don't need to try to hide that. They don't need to try to downplay the crime. I think victims need to have sufficient notice so that they can be present for these hearings or these pleas, so that the courts are aware that these victims are involved. They want this person prosecuted. I think that there's an opportunity for growth on both levels there. To criticize a judge, you know, I don't want to get in that position, Armstrong, but what I do believe is that there needs to be some consistency across the board as to how violent offenders are punished.
Marcus, do you think justice is blind?
That's a good question, Armstrong.
And you know the answer.
I don't believe justice is always adequate. Justice should be blind. However, when a lot of times when you have this amount of volume of criminal activity happening and they're going through the justice system, a lot of times, just like the attorney said, you know, the victims won't get adequate time to come. A lot of mistakes are made in these cases, and it's unfortunate. And so just a blanket attitude goes over most criminals or people who are innocent sometimes. And it is unfortunate. What I will say is also, and I did want to bring this up, this is not just an issue where, you know, just certain people are getting affected. Taxpayers have been affected tremendously also. You have places like Chicago where if the family's been a victim of a violent crime, the payout from the city is $25,000. In DC, the payout is $10,000. So it's not only are we just being put in fear, but we're also being taxed.
But then if
also.
you're painting people out that way, you're encouraging them to lie about their crimes and to create crime. That's crazy too. Dominick?
Say again?
So here's here's the point as we wrap this show. You know, is this going to get any better? Are we going to improve the lives of people in their communities? Or is this going to get worse? And what is it that really works? That's not working now, Dominick.
No, it's not working. It hasn't worked in a long time, and the circle is going huge. Justice isn't blind. Justice really has a love for color. In the black community, justice loves to create laws, enforce laws, and target the black community like crazy to pump them through a criminal justice system that farms them for profit. I've been talking about this for years, and it loves to create a narrative that the new cops who come on who have no experience whatsoever. We have the most abysmal candidates for police on the street right now who are now automatically thinking that every black person on the planet is an animal thanks to what we see on social media. They're going to treat them like that. And you're going to have a non-stop circular ebb and flow of law enforcement laws and victimhood and criminality. So it's a great, whoever designed this social problem with criminality and the criminal justice system did a damn good job, because I have no idea how we get our way out of it.
Derrick, you agree with him?
Well, I mean, I agree.
Well, maybe you don't.
Well, I agree to a certain extent on certain things. I think, so interestingly enough, I think
you don't think that many blacks are stereotyped?
Oh, absolutely, they're stereotyped. I mean, unfortunately, you know, we do police crime in black and urban communities a lot more aggressively than we do in white communities. I mean, that's just a fact of how things are. However, I think that where we are in society, where we've seen the softness of police officers during the George Floyd time, and now under the Trump administration, we're seeing a much more aggressive police officer. And I think, you know, we'll start to see things kind of swing back to the middle. So it's kind of like a car going out of control. You go to the left too hard, go to the right too hard, and then it kind of centers itself. But again, I think as a nation, we have to really move more towards community and figuring these kinds of complex problems out, because the police is not the answer to situations. Not all situations.
And just as you said, Derrick, it comes down to that policing is reactive in its inheritance. However, we can be proactive through the relationships. The director of the FBI stated the only way they can be effective is by having these relationships with local law enforcement, and the only way that local law enforcement can be effective is by having relationships with the community. That just is what it is. However, we have to have this shock through the federal agents and the National Guard coming to D.C.
All I can tell you is this: get armed, okay? Go and get your conceal and carry. Be legal, moral, and ethical, because by the time law enforcement gets there, it'll be too late. And I'm telling you, these are dangerous times. And the Bible tells us watch as well as pray. But I'm telling you, arm yourself. I'm not saying with a firearm, but with mace or whatever, you better be ready, because these thugs are still coming, okay? And you need to let them know that you're not going to be intimidated and you're going to lose your life or live in fear. Law enforcement cannot do it alone. Everybody must do this collaboratively. Hey, Derrick, Marcus, Attorney Mcgill, Izzo, Dominick, thank you, and Leonard Snipes, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Equip yourselves. You better believe you better equip yourselves.